Yay. Okay. Our focus today is going to be on strategy as essential rule and this concept called the strategy bottleneck aspiration triad. I'll just introduce myself very briefly. My original training was chemical engineering. I worked for DuPont for 25 years in a wide variety of fields. I'm the author of the Emergent approach to strategy. I'm also a researcher in adaptive systems and a musical composer as well. I believe that this kind of diverse view of the world and these fields that I've been involved with gives me an innovation view of strategy, a creativity view of strategy that might be a little bit unique. So what is this emergent approach to strategy? It is both a new theory of strategy and a modified practice of strategy. And we're going to focus today on a few things: strategy definition, we're going to focus on, and how to design in a simple way strategy. These are 6 of the concepts in the emergence approach, both theory and practice, that you'll see if you get into it. They range from definition and theory all the way to dashboards and how to evolve over time. Our focus, before we get into some of these, let's take a minute to ponder the question: what does emergent approach mean? What does emergence mean? I'm going to set up a poll here, but why don't you think about this for 1 second, then I'll bring up the poll. We'll see how people feel. Everybody see the poll? Go ahead and take a few seconds to answer. Can we get 16 of 21? One more? All right, we'll have to, yep, there we got it. Okay. We can see the results here. In tune with complex adaptive systems. That's the one that I think we're looking for. It's not actually bottoms up versus top down. That is an organizational concept, not a not an emergence concept. And actually, I don't believe there's such thing as emergent strategy, which we could talk about if people have interest. But the one that's really of value is in tune with complex adaptive systems. So let's talk about what is a strategy. I'll do another poll. Take a look. Go ahead and vote. Can we get 16 again? Oh, 17, 18. Yay. Okay, we're doing pretty good. Almost everybody. All right, in interest of time, I'm going to end the poll. A lot of diverse opinion here. Here's where I am on this one. It is the central rule of a strategy framework. And here's the framework, all this stuff. It is not strategy themes. It is certainly not everything the organization does. It is interlinked choices in that strategy framework, but that's not the strategy. And it is unique and integrative and forward-looking. But again, that's the attributes of a strategy, not what a strategy is. So we're looking for the central rule in the emergent approach thinking. So I'll take the poll away and let's dig in. In practice, the vast majorities of quote strategies I've ever seen in any field, military, government, corporate, community, churches, nonprofits, schools, are high-minded visions and goals, overall goals, followed by lists in strategy themes of sub-goals and initiatives. And this is really the problem in practice right now. These are not strategies. They don't give guidance. They actually do damage. And we've got to get away from this view of strategy. And we can say it this way, that the one item missing in the vast majority of strategic plans is a strategy. So let's dig into this. Here is a strategic framework, or a strategic plan, or what I call a strategy framework. We're all familiar with these elements. It's the strategy part that's usually missing. It's okay to have lists of tactics, plans, and metrics, but that doesn't replace a strategy. So the definition of the strategy, the central rule of this framework, that rule, that principle, that policy that makes the whole thing coherent, that brings everything together. And what is the focus of that rule? It's to bust the bottleneck, to bust that which is in the way, that which is keeping you from the aspiration, however you define that aspiration, whether it's a high-minded vision or mission, or whether it's a specific goal. And these 3 points are so important. They're really the heart and soul of a strategy framework. Now we give it a name. I'll get to that in a sec. I'll make one other point. What is the strategy framework for? It's for guiding your actions and decisions as you walk down the road, trying to take a system from A to B. Whatever that system might be, it doesn't matter. And we can think of it as from a current state to a future state. What is your North Star as you walk down the road? What is your North Star that's guiding all the actions and decisions you have to take as you work? So let's come back to this. These 3 key elements of aspiration, bottleneck, and strategy. I'm going to show you where this comes from. And I'm going to use a very simple example. This is the example used in the book and also on online task sets where you can see this drawn out in detail. If you work backwards, say this is your goal. You're going to launch a box shop in whatever country you're in, whatever town. If you work backwards from that goal, you are faced with countless decisions and choices. And the way you can see that is working backwards from the goal, where you do a game called, if I knew how to calculate the thing, each element, I could work back to the decisions I have to make. We don't have to get into the heuristic and how it's done, but when you work backwards, you get a complicated diagram with influences working backwards and forwards and up and down until you get to the point where you hit decisions you're actually free to make. You can choose what to spend money on. You can put inventory in, you can hire people, but you can't choose to have a successful bike shop directly. And from this little model, and don't be fooled by its simplicity. Its simplicity is such a virtue. From this simple model, we can kind of get 4 what I call killer problems of innovation, for general conclusions. And they are, first of all, for any given aspiration, and of course, the bigger the aspiration, the the bigger the number of choices. For any given aspiration, the sheer number of choices you have to make to achieve that aspiration grows exponentially as you work backwards. Number two, there's a time delay between when you take action and when you get the results. On a bike shop, it might be a year or two. And if you're building a $1 billion fab, it might be 10 years. Who knows, right? What that time delay is, but we know that it is always there. Killer three, unknown, uncontrollable influences from the outside of your system. They might be in your corporation. All of a sudden, leadership may change direction, or they may be competitors. They may be market and so forth, government. And the fourth, that kind of sums it all up. What's most important, the success of your bike shop, is the least actionable. It's kind of the biggest killer problem in life. That the thing that matters most that you're trying to achieve is the least directly actionable. It's the least impacted by your actions until you feed them back to what you can really do. And this is the fundamentals of this emergent approach, and it does describe an emergent complex adaptive system. So we use this symbol, I call it a flute because of music. You can call it whatever you like. This represents the idea that for every goal, big or large, small or large, you will have a myriad number of choices and decisions with all kinds of reasons why it's not trivial on how to choose those decisions. So how do we deal with this mess? This is where the triad comes in. So say we have that same picture and we have this aspiration of a successful bike shop. The strategy is this central rule, this central concept that makes everything coherent in the choices and decisions you have to make. So for a very simple example, it would make no sense to have a very simple, rustic, working shop if you were going to be trying to sell very high-end bikes to people that are looking for the luxury of the whole thing, right? And the whole buying experience. You wouldn't have a very high-priced bike shop and then sell very inexpensive bikes. You need coherence in everything you do here, and that's what the strategy is bringing. How do you design the strategy? It's to bust whatever is in the way. In the example in the book I give, this person who has to create a bike shop is a bike person. They have experience with that, but no experience in business. So they need a way to make all these decisions without business experience. And I go into different stories about how there are outside companies that'll do it for them, or he ends up with, or she ends up with a very simplified shop that makes it easy. Whatever it is, the strategy busts the bottleneck to the aspiration. People do this naturally. We all do this naturally. This is what entrepreneurs do. They're constantly taking away bottlenecks and then raising up to the next aspiration. This is a very fundamental concept in complex adaptive theory. There's different language for it. Sometimes the right-hand side is called the outcome level, or the global, or the macro level, or the high level, and the action side is the decision level, local, micro, or just low. And the real key is that what matters is on the right-hand side, but what you can do is on the left-hand side. It is a very universal concept. You can use it for music. A successful piece cannot be achieved directly. You can say, I'm going to write the next great symphony, but that doesn't mean anything. All you can do is write down notes. And sometimes, somehow, you need a way, a coherent theory, that makes all those notes work in concert that leads up to the successful piece. And again, it's through the bottleneck. So right now I'm writing a piece for non-professionals, for students. And my bottleneck is that difficulty is one of the features that I have to be extremely cognizant of, and that I need to write the notes in a way that's both interesting, but doesn't take me out of the bounds of the difficulty of what they can play. Take a quick look at this. A rough cut of some examples of strategy triads in different fields. Any resonate? Here's one in an article in Strategy Magazine that you can get for free. Company wants to increase profitability by 12% in 2 years, but the company's history is that marketing historically gets whatever they want. And so cost is completely out of control, and inventory is out of control, and the complexity of the supply chain is out of control. What's the solution? This is something we did at DuPont all the time. Demand segmentation rules so that there aren't unlimited products, packaging, availability, features available to marketing, but that it's controlled. It's really interesting to compare Ford and Tesla 100 years apart. Both of them had to create the ecosystem and the price and availability for their product that could turn it into a widespread adoption. And in both cases, I think the strategy for Ford was stated better as never allow style and options to be put ahead of price and throughput. And all the energy was putting into the engineering that would avoid the craftsmanship that was how cars were built before the assembly line and Ford's system. And it's really interesting to compare that with Tesla. I saw a little clip of Tesla being asked, why did you succeed when other electric car companies have failed? And what was his answer? We're an engineering company. It was all about that feature. And I think that what that meant is where he put his time. He talked about he'd spend time on the factory floor. CEO spending time on the factory floor. His guiding principle was that that's what's in the way. What about an app? I use a lot of apps like you guys. I've been experiencing Zoom in a big way, and music writing apps and video apps and everything that we all use. And I sometimes wish that they would spend more time on making the features they already have better and more usable than adding features constantly. And I wonder, in some cases, share loss might be quite counterintuitive to say, instead of adding more features to stop share loss, we ought to get better at the things we're already doing, which could be a real strategy here. Anyway, some examples. So how do you design strategy? This is where the concept of Agile comes in. And it's to avoid the problems with designing strategy by cascade or by what I call plumbing charts, stepwise systems, where you say, first we define the goal. After we're done with that, now we go ahead and we do some market research. And after we do that, we make some strategies. After that, we make some plans. After that, we do a dashboard, and you have this kind of cascade down. Another example of cascade that's a real problem is the CEO's got goals, and now we'll just cascade those goals down in the organization in strategy themes, in OKRs, or in balanced scorecard strategy themes. They're not strategies, they're sub goals. And when you cascade a big goal down to a bunch of sub goals, you haven't created a strategy. All you've done is divide up all the parts, and there's no coherence anymore, because ops is going to do what's best for ops, and marketing's going to do with what's best for marketing in the absence of an overall guiding strategy. So how do we design starting with these three elements when we know it's not simple and it's a big mess? In the general case, we're going to use a strategy matrix that looks at strategy alternatives, has fitness criteria by which you judge those alternatives, and then assessments of the alternatives against those fitness criteria. And if I really drew this to scale, these would be tiny, draft it and finalize it. And this would be where all the action is. And this is where I say it's like a puzzle. You do it all at one time, trying to make this thing look right. Here's what a strategy matrix looks like. It's abbreviated as SAM. Sorry for another TLA, three-letter acronym. I try to avoid them, but once in a while you have to use them. Here's the strategy framework up here. And then alternatives, use the current as the first one. Alternatives doesn't have to be 3, could be 4, could be 2, doesn't matter. Could have sub-alternatives. And your fitness criteria, everything by which you would judge these alternatives. You evolve it by stressing it. You stress it with information, debate, much less writing, much more debating, much more research, run experiments, talk to stakeholders, talk to the value chain people, and start to get this matrix to make sense. I liken it to solving a puzzle. You'll never be able to do it. You would never pick up a puzzle piece and say, okay, I'm not going to do anything else till I know where this piece goes, right? And when you're done, you'll never have all the pieces. I can't help but to laugh every time I hear sometimes you have to make a decision without all the data. Well, what the hell does that mean? There's no such thing as all the data, not to mention there's no data from the future, only models. It's always going to be uncertain. It's always going to be messy, and it should be. I won't do the poll, but I want to be clear that though I don't talk about these directly as part of the approach, all of these things can be useful, but not individually. They have to be fed into the overall picture. Another way of showing that you can use all of these concepts to feed and evolve this overall strategy matrix. And we want it to be messy and ugly where you beat it up. The key is that its design principles leads the way, not a cascade and not a sequence. I want to give a shout out to Chris Fox in StratNav app. He's incorporated a SAM into his strategy application, and you can find him very easily. Today, though, for the rest of the time, we're not going to work at the SAM level. Often, the best way to get started is with a triad. Sometimes you don't even really need to get to the big alternative matrix, and you can make real headway just with the triad. I'm going to call on Angus Grundy to do a little Miro board exercise together, where we look at starting with a triad. So I'm going to come out of here and I'm going to go into Miro. I think maybe this might be an opportunity, though. Can we open it up if anybody's got any comments, questions?
Absolutely. And sorry, Angus, now I did it again. I'm really sorry. Maybe you want to share a link to the Miro thing in the chat if you want people to join while we...
Yeah, Peter's just going to share
No,
this,
we're going to do it
screen,
live. We're going to do it
we'll
live.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to take an opportunity to...
I think let's get into it, Peter, yeah?
Let's get into it. No comments?
Well, I have a question, Peter.
Yeah.
Which was that the word Toyota Kata came to my mind for unexplainable reasons as you were explaining your approach. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept from Lean of how to reason around next steps and target conditions and all of that. Is there any similarity in your mind, and in case, how do you differ?
It's funny. One person I remember when I was developing this early on at DuPont, said, "This is lean for strategy." And I think there is a lot of commonality there. I may not know the right language. I'm not exactly sure the specifics of what you're referring to, but I do think there's a lot of alignment in it. Yes.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Nigel.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, that probably segues nicely into what I was going to say. So I spend a lot of time working with lean teams, helping them facilitate Hoshin strategy better. So Hoshin planning, and actually spend a lot of time working upstream of deployment into actually refinement, that sort of thing. And I suppose a reaction, Peter, but I remain curious, was I winced slightly when you talked about cascade. So I use the phrase cascade a lot. And from a Hoshin planning perspective, it really means negotiation. So rather than communication, and also how we cascade in a performance-driven way, bringing cross-functional conversations together. So I think I would say not all cascade is evil, but I remain curious to see what comes out of the Miro board and that sort of thing. The thing I love. The thing I love. Oh, it's got a bit loud. The thing I love about the model is I think is your focus on aspirations as a start point, and that's certainly from my perspective, process to one side. Any strategy is really a negotiation with your future self, right? So the first rule of negotiation is expectation impacts outcome. So you've got to have the expectation you have on your future performance and the aspiration you have. That is the guiding context really of any level of thinking that you apply, which I think they were two initial reactions, and thanks for sharing.
Well, Nigel, thank you for that. I think we have to define what we mean by cascade, because I have no reason to believe that we're conflicted there. So for example, oops, sorry about that. What I mean by cascade is a figure like this, where you do goals first, then strategy, then bottlenecks, then strategy, then plans, then metrics, and that it's not an integrative process. That's all I'm saying. And like this, define, analyze goals, strategy, alternatives, plans, metrics. That's a cascade. That's all I'm saying I don't want to do, which I don't think is in conflict with the cascade concept that you had.
Yeah, cool.
Remy?
Yeah, thanks very much. Mine, I think the slide you put up is speaking to that, because the one on the top right is similar to Roger Martin's cascade approach. So I wanted to hear what your thoughts are about that cascade approach. Is an integrative set of choices as well, but it does give guidance as to where to start, but I don't think it's regimented that in a way that it flows unidirectionally. On the contrary, it gets adapted. So with the circle back arrows you have there, I think that kind of introduces some dynamism that may, alleviate the issues or challenges you see with Cascade. What do you think about that?
Yes, and thanks for raising that up. Every strategy process I've ever seen has back arrows, but they don't work unless you have a system to make it integrative. Roger does have this cascade, but he recognizes the problem with it, and he does verbalize, I want you to do it all together. But you need a system for doing that. You need a tool that enables you to integrate these things with design principles. And his definition of a strategy of integrative choices, yes, it is a choice, and you do have to integrate all these elements of a framework, but that's not the strategy. The strategy is the overall principle that makes all those choices coherent, that brings them together. I believe there's many things here that are in line with what Roger Martin teaches, but I think he's got a few things that I believe I've brought to another level of clarity. Any others before we move on to the Miro board? Thank you for that, Remy. Cool. Angus, do you want to just give a little background here?
Yeah, so thanks, Peter. And just to say, this is obviously definitely still Peter's show, but he invited me to take part because we're going to do something a little bit experimental and invite you to comment and give your suggestions. So I'm going to be kind of the one driving and capturing your input, and Peter will still be there kind of leading the process. But what we've just done is turn the triad, you can see the flute shape there, into a very simple Miro template. But I've been using it with my clients, and it's really, I believe, very effective at getting to the meat of the problem. So we've set this up knowing the nature of this meeting, and it's called Agile Strategy. We're saying, so let's say that the problem that we're facing is that the current strategy is a long list of sub-goals and initiatives. And maybe we're giving ourselves a straw man there, but it's Peter's show, so this is what we're doing. So that's the problem. And let's say then the aspiration is to bring a better strategy approach into our organization, which I think is what Mawson's whole thing is, whether that's the emergent approach or whether that's something else, but we recognize the need to bring a better strategy approach. So what we can do, what we want to do is actually ask you what you would think. Let's seed it with something here, which is a common theme that we hear. Leadership blames everything on execution. It's not the strategy's fault, it's the execution fault. That might be one bottleneck that's in the way of bringing in a new approach to strategy, because everything else, it's really down to execution. So can I ask you to give us some, maybe out loud as well, we could go off mute, it might be chaotic, but if you can put just in a few words in the chat, and then I'll convert these into
Angus, do you want to share the link, and those of us that know Miro can crack on? Would that be easier or harder?
Can we do it this way?
Cool.
I can't, yeah, if I share the link, I could quickly turn it into a different thing. Can we try for it just a couple of minutes?
I think maybe the problem is there's a whole bunch of other stuff on that board elsewhere, and that maybe it would be just as easy to keep it.
Oh, it's let's do it so that please type in the meeting notes.
Yeah, no,
I
you
did that myself.
you can raise hand, you could type in.
Morton started. If you
Sorry, Peter and Angus, I think I muted you by mistake. So please unmute yourself.
yeah. I'm just going to create a few more of those.
Stop starting, start finishing. Rick, can you say a little more about that one?
I think it's just the idea that organization get very distracted by the next thing, and create so many next things that you're diffused. You've diffused your capacity, instead of focusing on the vital few, the things that you actually need to make progress on.
Right, now, this is obviously it's a very general case. We've given you no indication of what the actual context is. We're just capturing things here. Let's see, any more stop, starting, start, finishing, and capture that one. Now, can we start to group any of those into different things? Let's see what we got there. Too many initiatives, no focus, priorities, too many initiatives, stop starting. These seem to be connected. So we might start saying, well, let's make that one dark and let's cluster things around that one. People say we don't know the strategy. Too much analysis. Oh, I'm trying to get back to, see, this is why I'm driving and not leading. Peter, you can lead, and incentives polarized.
Well,
No
the first thing I want to do is point out that when you do this as a, as a whole, you start to move things around in categories. So for example, too many initiatives and no focus, I would argue, is part of the driver for doing this in the first place. And I would put that up with the current strategy, a long list of sub goals and initiatives. It's kind of a subset of the reason why you feel you need a better strategy process in the first place. Angus, can you make that move? I know you're trying to.
So I'm just trying to catch up. And yeah, lack of resources. Let's take that one. And then I think we've probably got it enough for now. Yeah, sorry, Peter. Which one did you want to?
You see the one you darkened? Too many initiatives, no focus. I would say that's part of the reason why, and I'd put it over there with the gray on the right. It's the reason why we're doing it, meaning it's. And you find that this happens all the time. You think it's a bottleneck and it's really a goal, or you think it's a fitness criteria and it's actually a constraint. And this is part of the beauty of doing it as a whole in an agile way, instead of doing it cascade one step at a time. Not aligned on priorities could be bottleneck, and that's why you have so many initiatives. I think that works. Are there any others that we would say are really redefining the problem? And that's one of the one of the guidelines on creating and knowing whether you've got the right bottlenecks is to be sure that it's not just a restatement of the problem or a restatement of why you have the aspiration. Are there any others in this category? Maybe multiple competing goals?
Yeah, we've also got from Aaron here, what's the actual vision or mission? What is required to align the strategy? So yeah, as we said, we've kind of jumped down into the depths a little bit. We stepped back and said about the vision and the mission, but that might be something that people say is lacking. So yeah, we could add that as well. But we're going to get very cluttered here, Peter. So I think we should.
Yeah, no, I don't think we have to put too many more. I'm looking for people to take a look at these and see if any of them are actually just really redefining the problem or restating the problem. Like too many initiatives and no focus was. Would maybe no difficult choices being made would be an example of the problem, not a bottleneck, meaning it's expressing why you need a better strategy approach. Any
Yeah.
others?
You know, ironically, I suppose the ultimate problem is surely somewhere the business has failed in some way. That would probably be, you know, if generally, why does our phone ring, right? The business takes a sharp breath, looks in the mirror and realizes it achieved about 30 to 40% of what it set out to do.
Which would be again on the aspiration side, right? That's
Yeah.
why we need a better strategy approach. Facing activist pressure, I believe, would be not a bottleneck, but actually a cause for a better strategy approach. One of the other criteria on bottlenecks is that it can't be either ridiculously easy to solve or ridiculously hard, unsolvable. So ridiculously easy would be, we need a cost reduction. So our bottleneck is everybody doesn't know that. All right, maybe you don't need a strategy for that. You just need to tell everybody. In one case, that may be true. In another case, if they hear every quarter that we need an emergency cost reduction program, you might just telling them that again would have no meaning. So again, you have to decide whether a bottleneck is so easy that you don't need a strategy for it, in which case you wouldn't use it as a bottleneck, or so hard that it's ridiculous. An example of so hard would be, say your aspiration was to improve cost. And one of your problems is your factories are in very high cost places, very high cost to operate. But moving them would be 3 years of earnings of the company or 5 years earnings of the company. You wouldn't consider that a bottleneck because you can't do it. You can't overcome it. So why clog up the system with noise around a bottleneck that can't be changed? So it would just be a constraint and it wouldn't go on the list here. Are there any here that we think are ridiculously easy or ridiculously hard? Of course, we don't know the background, but maybe think of your own situations.
Morton's got his hand up.
Morton, please.
It's just Peter, I promised to remind about the time. So now we have
Okay, we're
about
doing
15
good.
minutes left.
Thank you. We're doing good.
Okay, so if we move to some strategies, Peter.
Yeah.
Um,
Should we pick one and think about strategies? I'd like to pick one. I'd like to pick on leadership blames everything on execution. If only my people would execute. We've got a strategy. Most cases, it's a list of goals. Let's pick that one. Let's just say in the analysis of your situation, you decided, well, these other things are there. That's really the issue. And until you can get by that, you're not really going to have a better strategy approach because leadership can stop it, perhaps. So if we could highlight that one, and then let's start thinking about strategies. By the way, sometimes you start with strategies because you have ideas already of what you think the answer is, and you work the other way. Again, it's a puzzle. So any ideas?
Again, in the chat, if you want to put some ideas down.
How would you deal with
this is a real issue in my book, because leadership is responsible for everything the organization does or doesn't do. So how can we be more self-critical with leadership?
So Gerald, let's give it a little more specificity. You know, you have leadership, you have a CEO, a C-suite that's convinced that their list of goals and whatever they call a strategy is, and the problem is people just aren't, whether it is working hard enough, trying hard enough, doing whatever they have to do.
They got to define what the execution deficiencies are to begin with.
Well, that would be great if they could do that, right? But now you are a middle manager in that organization. Let's just set that. What kind of strategies might bust that bottleneck?
Sorry, Peter, are you talking about things to improve execution or things to improve the perception that it's all execution?
No, the bottleneck we've decided is that leadership thinks that execution is the only problem, and that's why they don't need a better strategy approach. You're sitting there saying, hey, marketing and ops and product development, we're all working separately here. There's conflict. So many of the things like were described here.
Yeah, I've just been clustering things here which are all related
They're all very related,
in some way to the idea
you know,
of leadership.
and that
there.
your belief is that these are all symptoms, right, of a situation where there's not a sufficient strategy process. There's not a sufficient strategy. How do we bring these people together? The problem is you have a bottleneck. Leadership won't let you do it. Leadership will not let you create a better process or what you believe to be a better process. That's your aspiration, to bring a better strategy process into the organization. How could you possibly bust that bottleneck as leadership doesn't want it? Because they don't think it's the problem.
Okay, I'm just adding some things in as strategies as they're called. You can speak to them, Peter, obviously, as they come in, but I'm just pasting these in.
Well, Peter, just thinking, isn't that actually the very symptom why there is a chronic strategy execution gap? I mean, it
Well, there
seems to
is.
be
So now
seems
you're
to be a recurring dysfunctional pattern.
so you're in a company, though, you recognize the recurring dysfunctional pattern and you want to do something about it.
Well, and then you're telling us that the people who are leading above and beyond you, they don't want to change it. So isn't that exactly the gridlock that you often end up in?
Okay, so say you tried, you brought in, okay, one policy, one approach is to bring in a prestigious consultant, right? Someone that you think the leadership would listen to. That's one approach to busting the bottleneck. Would another approach to busting the bottleneck, instead of facing the leader, the CEO, with the failure of the strategy and that they need something different and that you shouldn't criticize them, reveal the problems that the lack of strategy is putting. For example, show them how marketing's goals are exactly opposite manufacturing's goals and that there's an obvious conflict there. What if you had a strategy of visibility, where you're constantly trying to show the CEO the problems that exist with only a list of goals as a strategy versus an actual strategy? How do you feel about an idea like that? What other ideas might exist that can bust the bottleneck? The CEO doesn't believe we need anything better.
Aaron, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you. Can you hear me okay? I just want to double check. Okay, great. So I was really, my point of view is, if the leadership is suggesting, and I just put it in the chat, that execution is the problem and you feel there's a conflict with it, don't fight the conflict. Embrace the opportunity, which is they believe execution is the challenge, and either optimize, because there's very few organizations that don't have some execution problems, so you'll get wins anyways.
Right.
But more importantly, you'll earn the credibility with the leaders that as you think the other that there's other challenges with the strategy, you'll now have a seat at the table that you've earned from a credibility standpoint because you embraced what they feel is the priority. So instead of going to loggerheads with them, embrace the execution, whether it's Kaizen or Six Sigma, whatever the du jour is that you can apply, maximize that, and then work your way back to your problem or what you feel is are the challenges. And ultimately, if you optimize, you're going to highlight the gaps that exist between all the functional areas. It's just inevitable anyways. And you're going to have people with their flow gaps sitting there with a pile of to-dos and not executing, and you're going to be executing. You'll have the credibility. So I think you can always embrace whatever they give you more often than not.
I think this is really a great example of a true contrasting strategy with the other options we talked about. And it really has the characteristic of a true strategy rule. Instead of trying to prove him wrong, right? Him or her wrong, instead of saying, no, you don't get it, we need a new consultant. Don't you see the conflicts? Go with the energy and prove that execution is about as good as it's going to be. That is qualitatively different than a rule of, I'm going to do everything I can to show how dysfunctional this is and how the goals that everybody has that he thinks is a strategy are conflicting. And I think what's so valuable about this now, we've hit something. True strategies are qualitatively different when we look at these alternatives. We've got three that are truly qualitatively different so far. Bring in consultants. Number two, reveal the failures. Number three, Aaron's idea, go with it. Prove that execution is at the max. Is there a fourth general idea that someone can imagine?
So I think from my perspective, listening to what Aaron said, I think what I'd say is I mean, this is what I've done. If I'm honest, in full transparency, I did this as a consultant, fix execution, make it better. Well, and at the moment you are very clear about, hey, I've fixed it enough that now we can smell and see all the upstream problems in a really kind of in a more robust way that makes it harder. But year one, we'll fix execution. Let's go for it.
No, I think that you're putting a little more emphasis on Aaron's idea. I want to bring us back to the matrix. That's where the matrix would come in. We've got three viable ideas here. Three viable ideas as to how to address this goal, that we know we need a better strategy situation. The bottleneck is the CEO just doesn't want to see it, can't see it, truly believes execution is the issue. Three alternatives: bring in the outside army of consultants. Number two, reveal the failure. Number three, make execution so good and make it visible that it's really good, that the CEO has no choice but to say, well, boy, this execution's great and it's still not happening. We're not meeting our objectives, and will be forced into a realization their strategy. These three are truly qualitatively different alternatives. You would have to decide which of these has the highest probability of success with your fitness criteria. So one, for example, is, how long is it going to take to prove that execution is really good? What if it's going to take 4 years? That might not be an option that's available to you. What if he refuses to spend money on a consultant? That option might not be available. The point is that your fitness criteria are going to give you guidance on which of these options might be feasible that you just raised. And that assessment of those options is where all the effort comes in. Now, if the options were business options, questions around business model or product development and things like that, you would have much different input into these fitness criteria and assessments. But I think I just wanted to close the loop of where that triad process can bring you into a SAM, an alternative matrix that allows you to compare the alternatives in a very rigorous way.
Excellent timing.
Please, we're out of time. I'll just mention a few quick things and then we'll finish up. And if anybody has last comments, I'll just mention, of course, you need lists of plans, tactics, and metrics. Of course, with names and dates and all that. All we're saying is don't confuse all that with a strategy and that triad that gives true insight into what's the issue. Rummelt's crux. Bottlenecks can be of all different kinds. Don't be afraid that they're just assets or technical issues. Most of the time, it's people issues. We don't have time to talk about execution, but there's a whole nother view of execution and how to think about that in leading indicators in the dashboard. But we're gonna end there.
Peter, maybe just for the video, if you just go back to the Miro board as you were talking, I just
please, yes.
Just so the video will capture it. So I just organized those three things. So those three strategies that we kind of came up with, and obviously it's all on the fly and it's very quick and it's not how you really do it. But those would go into this strategy. Those would be the strategy alternatives that Peter mentioned that you take into the matrix.
The three that you land on. And it's always going to be messy. You're going to have a bunch of these things. You're going to throw them out. A month later, it's going to be a completely different. And that's a good thing because that means there's real learning going on.
So, Peter, just for the people who have to leave at the full hour, let's make a small pause. I think some of us can stay a little bit longer. But thank you very much for taking time to do this, and Angus also for helping bringing it to life. And Peter, what originally really intrigued me about your approach was really this idea of the puzzle and the strategy alternative matrix that for me resembles something I learned from Tom Gill, the impact estimation table. Not that it's the same thing, but I think you really managed well in what I took away to combine the qualitative with the quantitative in something I find rather unique. Well, so thanks a lot. And I know you have a few more minutes, so some of us can stay, but if someone has to go, then thank you for now.
Yeah, thanks everybody for having me in and for messaging. And I'd like to thank my partner, Angus, who you can find on LinkedIn. And he's a writer, strategist, and marketer as well.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Angus. That strategy matrix is not a new concept, right? That's an old concept. But it's how it's done is where the action really is. And it blends numerical and qualitative. And it's more about keeping it on one page and people really communicating. It's a communication device as much as it is a calculating device.
Yeah, would it be okay to open up a bit for questions for people who are left, if anyone has comments?
No, we can hang in.
And should we try to give it like maximum 15 minutes more? Would that be okay?
Be great.
So any questions, comments for anyone? Nigel?
I don't need to get, I know I'm conscious I've asked a lot and talked a lot. So if anyone else wants to do, I won't hog, but no one else has got their hand up. So I'll crack on. Thank you for that, Peter. I think I see a lot of similarities and a lot of, stuff to explore for me. I suppose I'm interested in, let's say you talk to a client and they want to get everything in place. What's the kind of time frame that you would recommend if you're saying, all right, if you want to start this at a point where you're nice, you've got what you need in place to be really effective, and you've got people through the thinking and the mindset and all that sort of stuff that you need. And let's say you want this all to kick off hypothetically on, the first week of January 2026. When would you start working with them to have that in place? How long do you see it taking? Because I think the reason I'm asking is you've talked about doing a lot of stuff at the same time, and I'm wondering if that gives you an opportunity to condense, or where the big, I suppose, where the bottlenecks are for getting this in and embedded in terms of decision making.
You're entering a really valuable discussion, and I think, and this is I actually had it up front in a tiny bit of a way here, and I like to bring it up. Throw a list, start with a triad. Actually, it was in another place as well. What is the essence of helping somebody with something, or helping yourself with something? It's to get to the point where there's creative tension. Starting with a triad, or in some cases, if you already have alternatives, starting with a SAM, and immediately asking what's in the way, we find gets that creative tension going much earlier than a traditional strategy process. And this is something Roger Martin also stresses, that you go out, and I call it collecting the usual strategy process suspects: share data, cost, history, finance, overview of the business and market. You haven't created any tension with that. You're just kind of repeating what everybody knows. I think the key is to start, and Angus keeps pushing me on this to stress this more and more. If you start with this triad, you immediately engage people, and the goal is that the timeline then follows from that creative tension instead of a set timeline. That if the people you're working with really get the questions that have to be answered and really get what's in the way, they'll stop thinking about a stepwise process where, okay, in 3 weeks we'll do this, and then a week we'll do that. And they'll start thinking about, what do we need to do to find out what's the right thing here? And I think that's my simplest answer to your question. I know there's a lot more detail. There's many cases where you're stuck with a timeline, or there's a decision coming and you have to take those into consideration. But I think in general, the magic occurs for consultants, internal or external, or team members, when you hit them with the crux of the problem, and now they're in the game. And you're not running things by sequential steps or a timeline, but by what do we need to know to get this right? I don't know if that helps, Nigel, or covers.
It does. I suppose what I'd say is what I find is it's kind of quite easy getting people to think aspirationally, because
Really?
it's almost so abstract that people enjoy it as fun, and that can happen it can still take, I think someone said, how long does it take to get an aspiration? I've worked with people for 3 months to get that, because people's planning horizons, their natural kind of frame of reference for time. Some people plan to the end of their nose. Some people are visionary and think in 10 years' time. So, but I think what's really interesting for me is it's always longer. I can give 6 months, and everyone thinks it's brilliant to start with. But as you start turning those aspirations, and you start saying, okay, well, we're putting more clarity around this now. This should start to become confidence, and you should start negotiating. The challenge is those, the feedback loops that we talked earlier. The impact of when that feedback loop is, no, that's not possible.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if as part of what you're facilitating, you find that as well. It's preparing the sign for me that something's been kind of negotiated or respectful is that cascade. It's such a challenge to kind of line up, make sure the conversations are happening, not for the yeses, but for the no's. Never say yes without an if. Yes, I can do this aspirational goal if I have this capability, capacity, resources, but never say no without a but. So it's the no's and how you facilitate those feedback loops that, for me, just kill elapsed time.
Let's give Ralph a chance.
I want to come back, Nigel, but let's get other people's thoughts in. But you're into this really good stuff there. Yeah, Ralph, are you
Yeah, I just wanted to know. Hi, Peter. I just wanted to know how much time do you actually spend on getting clear about the aspiration with the teams you work with?
I would say, actually, that's an outcome of solving the puzzle. You don't, and this is what I wanted to respond with Nigel. I would never run a session or I would try my best not to run a session that was just about the aspiration. I would try to get the bottleneck and strategy at a minimum in there, because once you start talking about strategy and what's in the way, it starts to bring the aspiration into focus. I don't know how many times I worked with people where the aspiration was the last thing to change, the last thing that became obvious. Because by looking at the implication of it, and Nigel, you hit it, are we talking 5 years or 6 months? Well, what's your strategy for that 6-month aspiration? Is there anything you really can do in 6 months? Oh, well, okay, I guess that's not really the time horizon that we can talk about. Well, let's talk 2 years. Can we do it in 2 years? You see how working on it all as a unit, as a complete whole, which the agile concept of a minimum viable matrix or a minimum viable triad allows you to test the aspiration, and you're not just judging it based on what you want. It's what's the reality of it as well. Does that get, Nigel, also to what you were thinking about a little bit? I think any item in isolation can't be discussed because it has no meaning. It's like, make an analogy to an automobile. Can you design an engine without understanding the rest of the automobile? There's no definition of an engine alone without a concept of the entire automobile. It's each of the components only makes sense in relative use with the others.
It seems like we are reaching a natural saturation point. Any other questions? Any other comments?
Comments? Criticisms?
I'm getting the deck if you're able to share, Peter.
Thank you. How can we convince, this is from Yazid. I hope I say it, pronounce it correctly.
Yes.
Hi, Yazid. How can we convince board members the urgency of changing the strategy? Otherwise, we're out of business, but they not understand the situation. How can we create the storyboard? I think you've really brought in a great topic that, has its own life, the problems with boards and as I take from your point, Yazid, the disconnect between where they are and the reality at, in the battle itself, right? And on the shop floor or the coal face or whatever your metaphor is, where the action is really happening. It's kind of like the little example we worked together. It's like the CEO not seeing things, but even worse because they're that much further away. I think it's the same discussion as we had with the CEO, but even in a more difficult situation.
We had a question from Anna as well. I can see you're still with us. Do you want to ask it yourself?
Was it Anna or Angel?
Anna.
Arna, what are some approaches? Arna, did you want to verbalize it?
Go ahead, Peter.
What are some approaches to identify bottlenecks? What are the non-obvious places to look? Well, that's a great area. And I think that's really the magic to finding strategy is to find the bottleneck. It's, and there's an old line, right? A problem half defined is a problem defined is half solved. And it's in that spirit. There are different ways, and I get into it more in the writing. I think a place to start is to really soul search whether you're ignoring categories up here, people issues, cultural issues. You know, here's one. Do people actually follow the tactical policy that you've laid out? And that's part of the dashboard that I recommend, where you audit adherence. But that is a place to start. Then there's also the guidelines, but like all of it, you won't find the bottlenecks in isolation. You have to think of them in the context of how you would change it, and you have to think of it in the context of the aspiration.
Any more questions or comments?
And then Ralph, yeah, so the process helps redefine the aspiration if needed. Many times the aspiration has changed, many times. Yeah, sometimes you're given your marching orders, but in many cases not.
I suppose, Peter and Angus, it's a good time to do a final wrap.
Well,
Anything
thank
else
you,
you wanted
Martin,
to do?
Thanks, everybody. And we look forward from hearing you if you have suggestions or, you know,
And to the question,
whatever, we enjoy hearing from you.
well, thanks a lot, Peter and Angus. And to the questions about presentation and recording. So Peter, you're sitting on both of those, but if I can wrestle those out of you, which we agreed,
Get them out of me. I won't
then,
even charge you for it. No.
Then I will distribute both after a little bit of friendly editing.
Great.
So thanks a lot. Thanks, Peter and Angus, and hope to see you all soon again.
Bye-bye.
Likewise. Thank you.